The story I would like to share with you is a story about a character known as Gluskabe. And yesterday I shared a Gluskabe story as well. And I guess the easiest way to describe Gluskabe is he was kind of like a Native and Abenaki superhero of long ago. They say he looked like a human being, sometimes he acted like a human being, but he had some special powers. The power to change himself, and even the power to change things around him. Ho?
Hey.
And one of the things they say that Gluskabe did long ago is they say he changed some of the animals. And I think by the end of this story, you'll be happy he did this. Ho?
Hey.
Well, they say that one day, long ago, Gluskabe, he wanted to make sure there weren't any animals that would be too dangerous. Because he knew soon the Onlumbak, the human beings, would come to this land. And he wanted to make sure there weren't any animals that would wipe them out. And so they say that Gluskabe, he gathered all of the Awasak, all of the animals around him. And when the animals were gathered round, he said the word in Abenaki for human beings. He said, Onlumbak. Try that. Onlumbak. Well, when he said that word, the animals were terrified because they knew the human beings would track and hunt them for food. Those that could fly flew high in the sky. Those that were fast ran far away. Those that were small went into their holes. Those that could swim dove under the waters. Almost all of the animals ran away. Almost all, that is, except for two animals. Well, two that I'll start with anyways. And these two animals, they're still around nowadays. But we say the first of these two animals were different than they are now. And these two animals were moose and red squirrel. I know, doesn't sound too scary. But like I said, those animals were different long ago. Now you already know moose is a pretty big animal. Well, they say the first moose long ago was 4 times the size moose is today. That'd be like twice the height of this pavilion. And red squirrel, little red squirrel, 5 times the size of the biggest bear. That's one big squirrel. And like I said, those animals didn't get scared when they heard the word for human beings. They got angry. Well, Gluskabe, he was a little concerned. He wanted to see what these animals were going to do. And so first he walked up to that big moose. He looked up at Moose and he asked, Moose, what will you do when you see the first human beings? Well, Moose started stomping its giant hooves in the ground, blowing snot out of its nose. And it said, when I see the first human beings, I will run through their villages. I will toss them up on my antlers. And when they land on the ground, I'll stomp them into the earth. Ho?
Hey.
Now, Gluskabe, he knew this would pose a problem. Having an animal like moose around wouldn't be too good for us human beings. And so Gluskabe, he knew he had to do something about that first moose. And so he used one of his special powers, his power to change himself. He took 1 deep breath, 2, 3, 4. With each breath he took, he got bigger and bigger and until he was bigger, taller than the tallest mountain, much bigger than that moose. And that's when Gluskabe just put out his hand and he said, Moose, you are very strong. See if you can move me. Well, that moose stepped right up against Gluskabe's hand and began to push and push. But it could not move Gluskabe. Instead, the harder that moose pushed, the smaller and smaller and that moose got. Until Moose was the size Moose is today. And that's when Gluskabe just lifted away his hand. And there on Moose's forehead was a black spot of hair, a black spot that's still there in every moose to this day. We call that the handprint of Gluskabe. And Moose's neck was kind of scrunched up like this. and that was from pushing so hard. Well, that moose looked around and noticed it was a bit smaller than it was before. And so Moose said, I better not bother the human beings, or Gluskabe might make me even smaller. And then that moose just trotted off into the forest. And as we know, moose hardly ever bothers us humans anymore, unless we get too close. Ho?
Hey.
Who was left? That red squirrel that was 5 times the size of Bear. And so Gluskabe, who was still a giant, he walked up to that huge red squirrel. He looked down at it and he asked, Red squirrel, what will you do when you see the first human beings? Well, that red squirrel, when I see the first human beings, I go pick up giant boulders and trees and hurl them at them. And I'll go to the land, tear to pieces everything I can find. Ho.
Hey.
Not only was Red Squirrel mean, it was a little nutty in the head. Gluskabe knew he had to change that giant red squirrel. And so Gluskabe, who was still a giant himself, much bigger than that red squirrel, he just picked that animal up in his hand and he gently began to pet that red squirrel. And as he pet that red squirrel, it got smaller and smaller and smaller and until it was about the size of Bear. But he thought, Bear will usually run away when it smells, hears, or sees human beings. This one needs to be even. Till it was about this high on you, and he thought, could still bite someone's kneecaps off. Until Red Squirrel was the size Red Squirrel is today. And that's when Gluskabe shrunk himself back down to human size. And then he dropped that little red squirrel on the ground. But right away, that red squirrel scurried up the nearest tree, got out onto a branch right above Gluskabe and began to chatter down at him, started to throw twigs and acorns at him. And to this day, if you ever get underneath a tree with a red squirrel in it, they will often do that. They will chatter down at you. They will throw things at you. And you know what they're saying in red squirrel language? I'll translate it for you.
I'll tear you apart. I'll tear you apart. I'll tear you apart.
Thank goodness for us. They're not 5 times the size of Bear anymore. Ho?
Hey.
Well, Gluskabe, he was feeling pretty good about himself, kind of patting himself on the back, walking along, and he suddenly noticed another animal. Now, this animal wasn't nearly as big as the other 2 had been. In fact, this animal wasn't much bigger than a human being, but he didn't like the way this animal was just kind of lurking up in the trees, watching and waiting. This animal was a cat. You know it as mountain lion. And Gluskabe, he saw this mountain lion. He thought, that cat might be dangerous, especially for some of the smaller human beings. I think I will change it just in case. And so they say that Gluskabe, he very carefully and quietly snuck up behind that mountain lion. And when he got right up behind it, he made him so big again, grabbed on to the end of its tail. But as soon as he grabbed on, that mountain lion jumped, he pulled, stretched its tail really long, but it slipped from his grip and got away. And Gluskabe was never able to change mountain lion. But to this day, all mountain lions still have a really long tail. And at the end of their tail, there's a black tuft of hair. We call that the grip of Gluskabe, where he held on so tight, but it still got away. Ho?
Hey.
And of course, there used to be lots of mountain lions, lots of cougars all over the East. And where they still live, to this day, they can sometimes, given the wrong circumstance, especially for younger people, be dangerous. But they also say that back in the days, there were lots of those cats here in Indakina, the land. If a young Abenaki person was walking through the woods and they thought one of those cats was getting just a little too close, they'd remember one of the things that Gluskabe could do in the stories of long ago. And if that cat got too close, they just make themselves look really big, like Gluskabe could do. And that mountain lion would just lope away. Because legend has it, mountain lion is still scared. Gluskabe is going to change it. And one final reason why Gluskabe didn't worry too much about the Onlambak, the human beings, is when he had first said that word, one final animal had actually just rolled over on its back and begun to wag its tail. Dog. And that's when he knew that dog would always be there to protect and warn us human beings, even from animals like Patolo, the long tail, the mountain lion. And so that is the story, the short version, no pun intended, of how Gluskabe changed just a few of the animals long ago. Ho.
Hey.
Thank you.